Στην κυρίαρχη αφήγηση, ο κορονοϊός παρουσιάστηκε ως το τέλος του κόσμου. Δημιουργήθηκε ένα δίπολο υγείας και οικονομίας. Τα κράτη σε μία νύχτα έγιναν αντικαπιταλιστικά, βάζοντας τις ανθρώπινες ζωές πάνω από τα κέρδη των αφεντικών. Καμία θυσία στην οικονομία δεν θεωρήθηκε υπερβολική, προκειμένου να προστατευτεί η δημόσια υγεία. Τα lockdown κρίθηκαν απαραίτητα για την προστασία μας και η οικονομία μπήκε στον πάγο, πυροδοτώντας μια νέα οικονομική κρίση.
A lot of things going on. We're going to be going over to the Hill, and we're having a lot of meetings. From the financial, this is a medical situation, not a financial situation. Financial, though, is moving along very nicely because we had the greatest economy in the history of the world until we got hit by this problem. This is the first time there's ever been a case where you want people not to work. It's always, you want to create incentive to work. We're creating not an incentive not to work, but the fact is we're asking people not to work because of they have to stay away from each other. If we're going to kill this horrible hidden enemy, we have to stay away. So we say stay at home and save lives. There's a time of shared national sacrifice, but it's also a time to treasure our loved ones and to take stock of what is most important, our faith, our families, our neighbors, and our great country.
Liebe Mitbürgerinnen, liebe Mitbürger, das Coronavirus verändert zurzeit das Leben in unserem Land dramatisch. Unsere Vorstellung von Normalität, von öffentlichem Leben, von sozialem Miteinander, all das wird auf die Probe gestellt wie nie zuvor. Also, es geht darum, das Virus auf seinem Weg durch Deutschland zu verlangsamen. Und dabei müssen wir, das ist existenziell, auf eines setzen: das öffentliche Leben, soweit es geht, herunterzufahren. Niemand ist verzichtbar. Alle zählen. Es braucht unser aller Anstrengung. Das ist, was eine Epidemie uns zeigt. Wie verwundbar wir alle sind, wie abhängig von dem rücksichtsvollen Verhalten anderer, aber damit eben auch, wie wir durch gemeinsames Handeln uns schützen und gegenseitig stärken können.
We are going into a global recession.
We're in an economic downturn.
The world is now in recession.
Recession in the next quarter or two because everything is shutting down, of course.
Policymakers in Washington have taken big steps to try to reduce the economic harm of the coronavirus pandemic. On March 15th, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates to zero. It also announced it would buy $700 billion in treasuries and mortgage-backed securities in an attempt to push down longer-term rates. As the central bank has continued to buy more assets since then, the value of its balance sheet exceeded $5 trillion for the first time ever.
This is an extraordinary disruption. It's almost like a meteor hit the entire planet, and we have to now deal with the fact that we've been knocked off our axis.
The Federal Reserve and Congress are taking extraordinary steps to try to keep the economy afloat. Still, economists warn this recession will be unlike other downturns in recent history because it was spawned by a health crisis, not by an unhealthy economy.
We may well be in a recession, but again, I would point to the difference between this and a normal recession. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with our economy.
Όμως η κρατική αφήγηση της διαχείρισης του κορονοϊού έχει δύο μεγάλα προβλήματα. Πρώτον, όπως προσπαθήσαμε να δείξουμε στο πρώτο μέρος αυτού του project, ο κορονοϊός δεν συνιστά σε καμία περίπτωση κίνδυνο για τη δημόσια υγεία. Δεύτερον και σημαντικότερο, οι οικονομικές κρίσεις στο κεφαλαιοκρατικό σύστημα παραγωγής δεν προκαλούνται από ιούς. Όχι, τα κράτη δεν έγιναν αντικαπιταλιστικά σε μία νύχτα και δεν επιβάλλανε lockdowns επειδή συγκινήθηκαν από τους νεκρούς από τον ιό, όπως δεν συγκινούνται και από τους νεκρούς από καμία ασθένεια αλλά και γενικότερα. Αντιθέτως, οι οικονομικές κρίσεις είναι η δομική ασθένεια του καπιταλισμού. Και τη συγκεκριμένη κρίση, το ανοσοποιητικό του κεφαλαίου δεν έχει καταφέρει να την αντιμετωπίσει από το 2008. Οι θεραπείες που έχουν εφαρμοστεί μέχρι σήμερα, όπως οι ενέσεις ρευστότητας, κατάφεραν να απαλύνουν κάποια συμπτώματα, αλλά ταυτόχρονα σκότωναν τον ασθενή. Το πρόβλημα μεταφερόταν διαρκώς στο μέλλον, όμως ταυτόχρονα γινόταν όλο και πιο αδύνατο να επιληθεί, καθώς τα μη βιώσιμα χρέη διωγγώνονται συνεχώς. Παρόλο που τα υπέρογκα δημόσια χρέη που φορτώθηκαν στις πλάτες εργατικής τάξης συνέχισαν να εξασφαλίζουν την κερδοφορία των αφεντικών προσωρινά, η κατάσταση των οικονομιών έχει πλέον γίνει επικίνδυνα απρόβλεπτη, ασταθής και ουσιαστικά ανεξέλεγκτη.
to answer your most original question about where is this next crisis or recession going to be, I think the answer is more trivial. We are already in a recession for the simple reason that we haven't exited the previous one. And the logic, the explanation for my answer is very simple. The 2008 and 2009 crises were dealt with quickly, mostly by emergency measures by the central banks. But as your piece mentioned, structural reform, there was no, in fact, structural reform. The economies were not restructured. The job markets were not restructured. And most crucially, the financial or banking systems were not restructured. There was a lot of regulation coming in, and it has been imposed. And in some ways, it's more clever regulation, and there is more knowledge about how finance works now. So there is more understanding of what is around the corner. But the structure, the key economic paradigm of oil-dependent and debt-driven growth is still there. The only difference this time is that we are lacking the safety cushion of emerging markets that came to the rescue in 2008 with huge liquidity injections and demand boost to the global economy. This is now missing.
Are we still in a recession, or are we firmly in a recovery now?
We are not in a recovery, and we're not really in a traditional recession. People think of a business cycle, and a boom is followed by a recession, and then there are automatic stabilizers that revive the economy. But this time we can't revive. And the reason is that every recovery since 1945 has begun with a higher and higher and higher level of debt. And the debt is so high now that it's since 2008, we've been in what I call debt deflation. People have to pay so much money to the banks that they don't have enough money to buy the goods and services they produce. So there's not new investment, there's not new employment, markets are shrinking, and people are defaulting, and the companies can't pay the banks. Now, the bank's product is debt. They try to tell customers debts are good for you, but the customers can't afford any more debt, so there's no way the banks can continue their current business plan. So we're really at the end of a long cycle that began in 1945, loading the economy with debt, and we're not going to be able to get out of it until you write down the debts. And that's what the IMF thinks is unthinkable. It can't say that because it's supposed to represent the interests of the banks. So all it can say is, gee, the banks won't make money even if there is a recovery. But there isn't a recovery because people have to pay the banks, and it's all a vicious circle. And basically, they're throwing up their hands, and they don't know what to do. Most banks, and Deutsche Bank is at the top of the spectrum here, banks that have decided, well, we can't make money lending to borrowers anymore, so we're going to have a second business plan. We're going to lend money to casino capitalists. That is, we're going to lend money to people who want to gamble on derivatives. Now, a derivative is a bet whether a stock or a bond or real estate is going to go up or down. And there's a winner and a loser. It's like betting on a horse race. And so the biggest bank lending for gambles, not for real production, not for investment, but just for gambles, was Deutsche Bank. And so the borrowers borrowed from Deutsche Bank to gamble. And what's the best gamble in the world right now? It's betting Deutsche Bank stock is going to go down. So all the short sellers have borrowed money from their banks to place bets that Deutsche Bank stock is going to go down. And now it's wringing its hands and saying, oh, the speculators are killing us. But it's Deutsche Bank and the other banks that are providing all the money to the speculators to bet on credit. The only way people can repay the debt is by cutting their living standards very drastically, by agreeing to shift their pension plans from defined benefit plans, where you know what you're going to get, into just defined contribution plans, where you put money in like a roach motel and you don't know what's coming out. You'll get rid of Social Security for governments. It means you'll essentially abolish government and turn it over to the banking system to run, with an idea that the role of government governments is to extract income from the economy to pay to the bondholders and the banks. When you say paying the banks, what they really mean is paying the bank bondholders, which are basically the 1%. So what you're really seeing right now in the IMF report and this growth of debt is the 1% of the population owns maybe 3/4 of all this debt. This means that there's a choice. Either you can save the economy or you can save the 1% from losing a single penny. And every government, from the Obama administration right through to Angela Merkel, the Eurozone and the IMF say, we're going to save the banks, not the economy. No price is too high to pay to try to make the system go a little bit longer, a little bit longer. But the fact is, ultimately, it can't be saved because of the mathematics that are involved. Debts grow and grow and grow, and the more they grow, the more they shrink the economy. And when you shrink the economy, you shrink the ability to pay the debts.
That bubble really began to leak air in the last part of 2018. In fact, the air started coming out in 2016. But then Donald Trump kind of threw it for a loop by winning. And that really postponed the recession because it created a lot of false optimism. And in that environment, the Fed was finally able to raise rates from 0.25%, which is where it still was when Trump was elected. Remember, before Trump was elected, the Fed had managed just one rate hike. That's all it had, from zero, right? Despite all this talk about how they would normalize rates, they never actually tried to do it until Trump was elected, and then you had all this enthusiasm. And so during that, euphoria, the Fed was able to get rates up to about 2.5. Then all hell broke loose in the fourth quarter of 2018. We had the biggest decline in the stock market since the Great Depression. And that's when the Fed did what I was warning they would do on pretty much every summit at sea I was at. I said they would have to abort their attempt to normalize interest rates. They could never shrink their balance sheet. If they tried, they would fail. And all of a sudden, the Fed stopped hiking rates. They cut rates 3 times in 2019. They restarted quantitative easing. They stopped quantitative tightening. They started expanding their balance sheet again. So this was already happening before COVID-19 came along. Then COVID-19 happens, and that accelerated the process, right? A much bigger hole in the bubble. And the point that everybody is missing is that COVID-19 is the pin, right? The problem is the bubble that the pin pricked, because everybody thinks we had a great economy before COVID-19. We didn't. We have a bubble. People are not asking, how are we going to pay for this? Right? The government is spending trillions and trillions more than it was. The government is now actually spending more money from debt than taxation. I just looked at the numbers today. 51.5 cents out of every federal dollar spent has been borrowed. So the national debt is $25.5 trillion and skyrocketing. The Fed's balance sheet is $7 trillion. So we're getting this massive increase in government spending, and no one's getting a tax hike. In fact, people are getting tax cuts. So how are we going to pay for all this government? We're not getting it for free. So this is the financial crisis on steroids as far as the amount of debt that can't be paid.
The ECB and other central banks flooding the world with cheap money isn't a cure. It's just pain relief. And in the long run, it has serious side effects. The entire setup is a system that keeps saving itself temporarily, but at some point it will inevitably fall apart. Until then, it exacerbates the enormous injustice that already exists. Those who have benefit. A handful of super-rich individuals own as much as the poorer half of the world's population combined. This flood of money is increasing the gap between rich and poor even further.
Τα κράτη, ως εκφραστές και εγγυητές του συλλογικού συμφέροντος του εθνικού κεφαλαίου τους, διαχειρίζονται τις κρίσεις σε 2 επίπεδα. Το πρώτο αφορά στο διεθνή ανταγωνισμό μεταξύ τους, με βασικό στόχο να αποκομίσουν μεγαλύτερο μερίδιο από την παγκόσμια αγορά. Οι προσπάθειες αυτές δεν περιορίζονται στον αποκαλούμενο υγιή ανταγωνισμό ανάμεσα στις επιχειρήσεις, αλλά αντίθετα διεξάγονται με κάθε διαθέσιμο μέσο, από δασμούς σε ανταγωνιστικά εμπορεύματα, κυρώσεις και εμπορικό πόλεμο, μέχρι και πολεμικές συγκρούσεις. Το δεύτερο επίπεδο αφορά στο εσωτερικό των κρατών. Εκεί βασικός στόχος είναι η αύξηση της εκμετάλλευσης της εργατικής τάξης και αφορά σε μέτρα όπως η μείωση του εργατικού κόστους και η αύξηση της παραγωγικότητας. Ταυτόχρονα λαμβάνουν μέτρα για την καθυπόταξη των κοινωνικών αντιστάσεων και την επιβολή των σχεδιασμών τους. Σε κάθε περίπτωση, κάθε κρίση κάνει πιο επιτακτική την ανάγκη αναδιάρθρωση των καπιταλιστικών σχέσεων παραγωγής συνολικά στην επιδίωξη ενός νέου, πιο αποτελεσματικού μοντέλου για την εκμετάλλευση της εργατικής τάξης και τη διασφάλιση της απαιλούμενης κερδοφορίας των αφεντικών.
There are four things that are the driving forces of our economy and our lifestyle and wealth. And the first and most powerful is productivity, which comes from people learning and inventing and doing things well, just as Marco described. Okay? And it grows slowly. You know, 1 or 2 or 3% a year, it grows slowly, and it's not volatile because knowledge isn't volatile, but it grows, and that raises our living standards over a period of time. Then there's a short-term debt cycle. The short-term debt cycle is, you know, recessions and expansions and booms and recessions, that they last about 8-10 years. And then there's a long-term debt cycle. And that long-term debt cycle, which goes on about once every 50 to 75 years, is when you begin a new type of money and a new type of credit. That began in 1945. The New World Order, at the end of World War II, and with the Bretton Woods monetary system, created a new monetary system in 1945, a new money. So they wiped out pretty much the old money, or they largely disposed of it, and they began anew, and that's the New World Order, which was the American World Order, and we have seen it, and still 70% of the money and credit that exists in the economy is running by dollars. And what you have traditionally is the breakdown. And then the fourth influence is politics. And politics is largely how we deal with each other. And there's internal politics and there's external politics. The internal politics is, how do you deal with the wealth gap? How do you deal with the values gap? Do you have a common mission? Do we have an American dream that we can agree on and that we're pursuing that together? Or do you fight over wealth and so on? And so when you look at history, that's what revolutions are in their various ways. And there's always a revolution in one of these. Sometimes those are peaceful revolutions, and so sometimes they're disruptive. So how people deal with each other internally. There's also external politics. So that politics means between countries. And you have a situation when there's a rising power challenging existing power. There is competition and there is a risk of war. And so how they deal with each other, so that whether there's a greater good or whether they are fighting with each other, is the defining moment. Are one country's vulnerabilities another country's opportunities? In such times, this is the case because, Graham Allison wrote a book about the Thucydides trap, and he reminded us, over the last 500 years, there have been 16 countries in which there's been a rivalry of an empire challenging another. In 12 of those cases, there have been wars, because at the end of the day, there's not even a global legal system. Power is what is the currency of that. So when you get into how do you resolve a dispute as to who gets what, that becomes a very complicated question. So I'm a globalist. I mean, meaning I have a dream and a wish that the best of the best can operate together and work together for that common good and so on. but it's dying because we're in an interconnected, fragmented world. The fragmentation of this, can I depend on somebody else to give me something I need? Or can I depend on them not taking advantage of me? No, you can't make those dependencies anymore. And that exists within countries as well as between countries.
About a year ago, you wrote a piece about how capitalism needs to be reformed, focused a lot on the wealth gap, the growing wealth gap, and the problems that that's causing. So what's our opportunity here? What changes can we make?
So the idea that the profit system can accomplish everything is not right, because resource allocation goes to those who have the resource. And so throughout all history, you go back hundreds of years, you see that any system works for those who tend to control the system. So let's say we have a capitalist system and we have entrepreneurs and you acquire money and all that, and then working with those in government, and they have a symbiotic relationship, and it works well for them. So it's self-perpetuating. And so when I look at that, I'm saying, I'm a capitalist. Please understand, I'm a capitalist. I believe in the system. I believe you can increase the size of the pie and you could divide it well. And if we talk about how to do that effectively, we need to do it. But there becomes a time that there needs reforms. And those reforms have to create productivity. It doesn't mean just give money away. It means how do you make those people productive so that they're also psychologically productive as well as physically productive in producing output.
Η καπιταλιστική αναδιάρθρωση είναι ήδη σε εξέλιξη. Η υποδομή και οι νέες τεχνολογίες πάνω στις οποίες αυτή βασίζεται υπάρχουν ήδη σε μικρότερο ή μεγαλύτερο βαθμό και αναπτύσσονται καθημερινά. Το όνομα με το οποίο έχουν επιλέξει τα αφεντικά να τη διαφημίσουν ακούει στον τίτλο «Τέταρτη βιομηχανική επανάσταση». Με αυτό τον επιβλητικό τίτλο επιδιώκεται οι σχεδιαζόμενες αλλαγές να προσληφθούν θετικά, αφού το δόγμα επιστήμης πρόοδος έχει περάσει αδιαμφισβήτητο τόσο σε αριστερές όσο και σε δεξιές συνειδήσεις, ενώ ταυτόχρονα προετοιμάζει το έδαφος για το εύρος και τη ριζικότητα των αλλαγών που το νέο καπιταλιστικό μοντέλο θα επιφέρει. Η τέταρτη βιομηχανική πλασάρεται ως η πραγματοποίηση ταινιών επιστημονικής φαντασίας. Πρόκειται για αλλαγές όχι μόνο στον τρόπο παραγωγής, αλλά και στον τρόπο που βιώνεται η καθημερινότητα, όπως άλλωστε έχει συμβεί σε κάθε καπιταλιστική αναδιάρθρωση μέχρι σήμερα. Ένας κόσμος, κομμένος και ραμμένος στα μέτρα των αφεντικών, πλασάρεται μέσα από εντυπωσιακά βίντεο, με αμάξια χωρίς οδηγούς και ρομπότ χειρούργους. Οι νέες τεχνολογίες της τέταρτης βιομηχανικής προπαγανδίζονται ως το μέσο προς μια κοινωνία όπου η φτώχεια θα εξαλειφθεί, η μόλυνση του περιβάλλοντος θα γίνει παρελθόν και μόνος περιορισμός είναι η ανθρώπινη φαντασία.
We are wondering what is happening to the world. Everything is changing.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
Our bodies will be so high-tech we won't be able to really distinguish between what's natural and what's artificial.
Inside our own heads is the most complex arrangement of matter in the known universe.
You might ask yourself, can we get to be superhumans?
The original Industrial Revolution was driven by the discovery that you could use steam engines to do all kinds of interesting things.
But that was followed by additional revolutions for electricity and computers and communications technology. We're now in the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution, which is bringing together digital, physical, and biological systems.
With the ability to visualize brain activity, for example, through a simple consumer-based EEG device, it gives us access to ourselves in ways that we've never before thought possible. It unlocks the black box that is the brain and enables us to really, truly be able to realize an identity that is aspirational.
We need a different economic model.
By that I don't mean capitalism versus communism. What I'm talking about is a shift in the system along the lines of the two big changes that happened in the 20th century, Keynesianism, with a much greater focus on health and education and the role of government working with business, and then a reaction against that in late century to neoliberalism, where the focus was on free markets, freedom of the individual, and getting governments out of the way. We need a shift to a new system that will allow us to meet the basic needs of every human on the planet, that will live within planetary means, that will be fairer, and that will be focused as its key goal, not on growth per se, but on maximizing human well-being. And history tells us that a values shift is triggered by creation of a new story about how we want to live.
I see the circular economy as something which fits very closely with mankind's goal to be innovative and creative and to always progress. We can use asset tracking, we can use IT, we can use 3D printing to enable this different economic model to recover materials, feed them back into the economy, and really to decouple growth from the resource constraints we have.
Think about the prospect of getting rid of plastics. We must not only be inspired or informed by nature, but actually use natural organisms with which to design products and building parts. Only instead of varying material properties, we're varying biological functionality.
The goal is no longer, I want to be less bad, less monotonous, less unsafe, less unjust. It's really about a diverse, safe, healthy, and just world with clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy.
Together we are fighting to preserve our fragile climate from irreversible damage and devastation of unthinkable proportions.
If we think about the original Industrial Revolution, it was an energy revolution. I like to think of it as a kind of bookending of a period in human history during which we used fossil fuels, and it worked very well for us for a long time. But now we have to bring that to an end. We have energy technologies that can power our civilization, solar, wind.
Walking around, you do see different stuff, as far as like the body marriage line. They use a lot of things that help them lift up and move things to the car. You just sit there and, program something, and it has its own set mind to go ahead and do everything. And then as humans, we just come in and take the extra steps to help the technology.
The projection of 5 million jobs lost by 2020 to technology is serious, but it's not the main question. Construction, manufacturing, services, public health and education, these industries will still exist. The main question is, what will be the future of work? How will we define work? How will we share the wealth?
From the viewpoint of the labor or jobs, now we really need new education or new training.
I just given a prize to a kid of 18 years old that has discovered something really very, very unique. Came up with how to get better productivity and better yields for seeds of corn. And so he basically came with the idea that if you would perforate these seeds, you would get more food. And you think about it and say, but he didn't go to university. So how does he get all that knowledge? And he told me, I've been watching YouTube since the age of 12, and I'm so interested that I've seen everything about it. I've read everything about it. The world is really open to learning. The thing is, how do you give the incentive to your kids to do that?
It's this ability of digital technology to change outcomes, to truly empower people all over the world that can create a more equitable growth, because I think the world needs that.
Fourth industrial revolution has the potential to make inequalities visible and to make them less acceptable in the future, and hopefully to gather and garner political support to take the necessary decision to reduce the gap.
Humans have always been using tools, but because of the recent advances in technology, we're beginning to have machines that can augment us in all sorts of interesting ways.
I was the first person in the world to be able to voluntarily move my legs while stepping in a robot by exciting the nervous system using electrical stimulators directly onto the spine.
We take two things from the patient. First, we take a three-dimensional X-ray and we extract the three-dimensional data out of that so we can make a perfectly shaped puzzle piece. And then we also take a sample of fat tissue from the patient so that we can extract the stem cells out of those. And we use those stem cells with this three-dimensional scaffold that we fabricate, and after 3 weeks we have a piece of living bone that's ready for implantation.
Being able to use genome editing to understand the genetic changes that lead to cancer, and technologies like drug delivery, getting molecules into particular types of cells. There's a lot of excitement about being able to move much more quickly on this disease.
Η τέταρτη βιομηχανική επανάσταση, έτσι όπως την οραματίζονται και τη σχεδιάζουν τα αφεντικά, αποτελεί μια ριζική αλλαγή παραδείγματος. Αυτή η αλλαγή βασίζεται στο χτίσιμο της οικονομίας γύρω από τα big data, το Internet of Things, το AI και άλλα. Σε αυτή την οικονομία τα data είναι η πρώτη ύλη. Μια πρώτη ύλη που παράγεται από κάθε μας δραστηριότητα, κάθε κοινωνική σχέση, κάθε βιολογική λειτουργία, σκέψη και συναίσθημα που μεσολαβείται πλέον όλο και περισσότερο από την τεχνολογία. Από το στίγμα της τοποθεσίας μας στο κινητό, την κάθε ψηφιακή μας αναζήτηση, μέχρι και τον παλμό της καρδιάς μας και τις εκφράσεις του προσώπου μας, οποιαδήποτε πληροφορία μπορεί να αντληθεί για μας μετατρέπεται σε καπιταλιστικά αξιοποιήσιμα data. Κοινώς, όσο περισσότερο ψηφιοποιείται κάθε ανθρώπινη δραστηριότητα λειτουργία, τόσο μεγαλύτερα γίνονται τα κέρδη των αφεντικών και τόσο περισσότερες πτυχές της ανθρώπινης ύπαρξης εμπορευματοποιούνται και μετατρέπονται σε νέες αγορές.
I think everybody in the room needs to remember, as an individual or a company, there's nothing for free. So if you're getting a free service for sharing your data, that's because the data is more valuable than what you would pay for it. The value of data goes up every day that AI advances. At some point, there will be a market for it. I think Apple does the right thing to keep a bunch of it private. Data is going to have more value in the future, and we're going to build economies on our data. Data will become a currency.
Data is the new oil.
They're calling it the fuel of the future, the latest wave of the internet revolution. Finding value in massive wells of information. Tech giants are mining trillions of bytes of data from our every move.
Internet providers see a huge market. I mean, this is like $1 billion market to be able to sell, to mine people's data.
Every click and cyber glance leaves behind a digital trace, revealing our interests, desires, movements, information we don't even know about ourselves. Data is a treasured asset, a currency that Silicon Valley trades in. The search for data has sparked a 21st century gold rush, and the payback can be lucrative. Google's parent company Alphabet has a market value of more than $640 billion, while Facebook's market cap is more than $430 billion. Investors are impressed with their ability to gather information, link social networks, and pull in advertising clients. One researcher forecasts that $187 billion will be spent on data and analytics technology by 2019, a 50% rise from the amount spent in 2015.
Surveillance capitalism begins with an audacious, unexpected, startling, and dark discovery that after all the things that capitalism has commoditized over the centuries, turning them into stuff that could be sold and purchased, in the early 2000s, and it happened at Google, and it happened under a state of financial emergency during the dot-com bust, what they discovered was that private human experience, what we do in our own lives, our behavior, our experience, could be taken without our knowledge, which is to say it could be stolen. It could be translated into behavioral data, behavioral data claimed as zero-cost proprietary assets. Those behavioral data travel through supply chains, data flows into a 21st century factory. We call it artificial intelligence. This computational factory, like every factory, makes products. They're prediction products. What it produces are predictions of our behavior soon and later, individual, group, populations. Those predictions are sold into a new kind of marketplace. I call them human futures markets because they trade exclusively in bets on what we will do. Now, the first human futures markets were, as we all know, online advertising, where they were buying a prediction product called the click-through rate. The $1 trillion capitalization of Google, the near $1 trillion capitalization of Facebook, in those two instances, that capital is entirely derived from this logic. Very important to understand, this is an economic logic. It's not technology. We can deploy digital technologies in 1,000 different ways. This is only one. So let's fast forward to some of its social consequences, because that brings us to the question that we're all here to discuss, which is rights. When you are a company and you are competing on selling predictions of human behavior, you're selling human futures, which is to say you are selling certainty. There are three things that you need to be successful in that competition. One, you need a lot of data. Everything. Natalie gave you a sense of that. I call that economies of scale. These data capturing supply chain interfaces, which began online when you're, browsing and searching and so forth, posting something on Facebook, they now extend through every domain of human life. It's your home, it's your car, it's your walk in the park, it's your bloodstream, it's your thoughts. Okay. They also need varieties of data. So volume, which is scale, and varieties, which is scope. It's not just enough to have what we're doing online. They want to have our feelings, our emotions, the state of our health. They take these things from, for example, the stoop of our shoulders when they take us walking down the street. They take them from the hundreds of facial gestures that they get out of facial recognition and 1,000 other ways. So they need scale and they need scope. Then they made an extraordinary discovery. The most predictive data comes from actually interfacing with us, touching our behavior, and learning how to tune us, to herd us, to actually modify our behavior in the direction that optimizes their revenue flows. There are many examples of this. I won't go into all of them now because we have a lot of time to talk. But let's just say that when you talk about Facebook's social contagion experiments, when you talk about Google's augmented reality game that we know as Pokemon Go, these were early phases of experimentation. And how exactly do you use subliminal cues, social comparison dynamics, rewards and punishments, the structures of gamification, to learn how to tune and herd individuals, groups, and populations at scale? This is a form of power that comes on slippered feet. It comes more likely offering us a cappuccino and just the way we know you like it. But it is a power based on an increasingly ubiquitous, pervasive digital infrastructure that has been commandeered by this economic logic to shape our behavior in a way that is aligned with its interests. And it is radically indifferent to everything else, which is to say radically indifferent to our actual needs, our state of well-being, and the needs of our societies.
Αν τα data είναι όπως λένε το νέο πετρέλαιο, τότε οι πετρελαιοπηγές είμαστε εμείς και οι νέες πετρελαϊκές είναι η τεχνολογική κολοσσοί όπως η Google και η Facebook. Το νέο καπιταλιστικό μοντέλο και η αποτελεσματικότητά του βασίζεται στη διαρκή και απρόσκοπτη παροχή δεδομένων τεράστιου όγκου και ταυτόχρονα όσο το δυνατό περισσότερων ειδών πληροφορίας. Αυτή η πληροφορία έπειτα συγκεντρώνεται και αποθηκεύεται για πάντα σε τεράστιες συλλογές δεδομένων γνωστές ως Big Data. Ο θαυμαστός καινούριος κόσμος της τέταρτης βιομηχανικής είναι ένας κόσμος μόνιμα συνδεδεμένος σε ένα ενιαίο δίκτυο, το Internet of Things. Smartphones, έξυπνες συσκευές σε έξυπνα σπίτια, wearables, έξυπνα οχήματα, ατομικές ψηφιακές ταυτότητες με ιατρικά, βιομετρικά και οικονομικά δεδομένα, αναβαθμισμένα δίκτυα επιτήρησης σε έξυπνες πόλεις με τεχνολογίες αναγνώρισης προσώπου και επεξεργασίας ήχου, όλα συνδεδεμένα μεταξύ τους 24 ώρες το 24ωρο. Κάθε κλάδος της οικονομίας, κάθε λειτουργία της παραγωγής και της κατανάλωσης και κάθε πτυχή της καθημερινότητας επαναορίζεται μέσα από το νέο καπιταλιστικό παράδειγμα.
When everything becomes linked with everything else, matter becomes mind, and the possibilities become endless. Imagine 50 billion IoT connected devices by 2020. Now, imagine the economic impact of these connected machines. $4 to $11 trillion per year by 2025. Wearable devices, environmental sensors, agricultural machinery, components in a vehicle, or devices in homes can all be connected to deliver insights and drive transformation. So imagine if you had smart devices in your home, your car, your workplace, or even on yourself. The world becomes alive. That's Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is making everyday objects into data factories. When Internet of Things, along with big data, meets artificial intelligence, this interface will become enlivened with intelligence, and a new world will take birth, which will increasingly talk back to us.
Tools are making this leap from being passive to being generative. Generative design tools use a computer and algorithms to synthesize geometry, to come up with new designs all by themselves. All it needs are your goals and your constraints. I'll give you an example. In the case of this aerial drone chassis, all you would need to do is tell it something like it has 4 propellers, you want it to be as lightweight as possible, and you need it to be aerodynamically efficient. And then what the computer does is it explores the entire solution space. Every single possibility that solves and meets your criteria. Millions of them. It takes big computers to do this. But it comes back to us with designs that we, by ourselves, never could have imagined. And the computer is coming up with this stuff all by itself. No one ever drew anything, and it started completely from scratch. And by the way, it's no accident that the drone body looks just like the pelvis of a flying squirrel. It's because the algorithms are designed to work the same way that evolution does.
Artificial intelligence is making rapid strides. There's talk of a new evolution that could fundamentally change life on our planet. Artificial intelligence has the potential to revolutionize every aspect of daily life: work, mobility, medicine, the economy, and communication. Silicon Valley in California. Apple, Google, and Facebook all have their headquarters here. It's the epicenter of the digital revolution. The tech industry has changed the face of the San Francisco Bay Area. New startup companies launch every day. Rents have exploded, and artificial intelligence is the buzzword. A new type of supermarket recently opened its doors here. Amazon Go. All you need here is an app.
Since you have an Amazon account already, please take it.
Hold your mobile phone to the scanner, and you're in. As Leonardo shows me Amazon's new menus and explains that the language assistant Alexa can help with the preparation at home, I'm under constant surveillance. Which shelf do I stop at? Which products am I interested in? On the ceiling, sensors and cameras. Intelligent image recognition captures my every move. What do I take off the shelf? What do I put back? And what do I take with me? This branch is still in its test phase, but Amazon plans to open 50 such grocery stores this year alone. The end of the sales assistant. Just walk out. No more standing in line. No cashiers. I feel a bit like a shoplifter as I leave. Comfort at the cost of privacy. My receipt. Researchers here have developed an artificial intelligence algorithm that can screen X-rays for certain diseases. Computer scientist Pranav Rajpurkar shows me how easy it is to use. Take a picture of an X-ray with your mobile phone, upload the image, and a few seconds later, you get the diagnosis. Like our brains, the network can learn how to identify tuberculosis, for instance. First, the network needs to be trained or taught. X-rays of tuberculosis patients are fed to the system. Initially, it struggles to correctly identify the condition. But every time an X-ray is fed in, the network's structure is adapted and its diagnostic ability improves. It takes thousands and thousands of clinical datasets to train the machine. Only after the network is optimized in this way can it correctly identify an unknown X-ray. Reading X-rays accurately is a complicated process, but artificial intelligence is making fast progress. When it comes to identifying or recognizing simple images, computers have surpassed human accuracy. Scientists are using artificial intelligence algorithms to sift through seemingly banal data, such as the up and down motion of the steps we take every day. They're looking for conspicuous patterns that could serve as early warning signs of disease. Scientists in the English city of Birmingham are working on a revolutionary diagnostic method. To date, there are no specific tests to detect Parkinson's disease, making diagnosis difficult. AI could change that. Max Little is a mathematician at Aston University.
Press Start Test to begin the recording.
Very good.
Voice changes can be an early indicator of Parkinson's. Max and his team collected thousands of vocal recordings and fed them to an algorithm they developed which learned to detect differences in voice patterns between people with and without the condition. In a lab-based study of the recordings, the algorithm was able to correctly identify a Parkinson's diagnosis nearly 99% of the time. Max Little's work is an example of the far-reaching changes AI is bringing to the field of medicine. It's no longer just doctors who are using artificial intelligence to develop new diagnostic methods, but data scientists, programmers, and mathematicians like Max.
Σε κάθε αναδιάρθρωση, τα αφεντικά δεν εντείνουν απλά την εκμετάλλευση της εργατικής τάξης, αλλά καλούνται να την επανεφεύρουν. Καλούνται να σχεδιάσουν νέες εργατικές φιγούρες που θα πρέπει να προσαρμοστούν στις καινούργιες ανάγκες της αγοράς και να κοστίζουν όσο το δυνατόν λιγότερο. Καθώς το υπάρχον κρίνεται συνολικά αναποτελεσματικό, η θέσπιση ενός νέου κοινωνικού συμβολέου γίνεται επιτακτική. Νέες και υπάρχουσες ιδέες για την οργάνωση και ρύθμιση της εργασίας κερδίζουν συνεχώς έδαφος. Η αμοιβή με βάση την αποδοτικότητα και φυσικά η ανάπτυξη μεθόδων για την παρακολούθηση αυτής της αποδοτικότητας καθίσταται ζωτικής σημασίας. Το ίδιο ισχύει και για την ευελιξία της εργασίας, τη ρευστότητα του ωραρίου, τη δουλειά με το κομμάτι ή το project κόντρα στην πιο παραδοσιακή μορφή της σταθερής δουλειάς σε έναν εργοδότη. Οι τεχνολογίες που μπορούν να αυξήσουν την παραγωγικότητα της εργασίας υπάρχουν, αλλά πρέπει να υπάρξει και το αντίστοιχο άφθονο και φθηνό εργατικό δυναμικό με τις απαραίτητες γνώσεις και δεξιότητες. Οι εργαζόμενες πρέπει να επανεκπαιδευόμαστε διαρκώς για νέες θέσεις εργασίας που θα αντικαθιστούν τις παλιές. Θα πρέπει να αποδεχτούμε τα νέα high-tech συστήματα επιτήρησης της παραγωγικότητάς μας. Σε ένα περιβάλλον σκληρού ανταγωνισμού μεταξύ μας, θα πρέπει συνέχεια να αναβαθμίζουμε το προσωπικό μας κεφάλαιο, δηλαδή τις γνώσεις και τις δεξιότητές μας για να επιβιώσουμε. Η προετοιμασία της μελλοντικής εργατικής τάξης θα λειτουργεί με την ίδια λογική. Μαθητές και φοιτήτριες θα πρέπει να ελέγχονται συνεχώς για την απόδοση και την αφοσίωσή τους, ώστε να βγαίνουν στην αγορά εργασίας όσο το δυνατόν πιο πειθαρχημένες και παραγωγικές.
Workers need help connecting the dots between their own work and the fast-emerging skills needed in the digital age. Employers need to open a dialogue with the workforce about the future of work. We have to start thinking about work in a more modular way, replacing broad job roles with things like tasks, projects, and personal goals. Movement across these component parts has to be more fluid, ultimately creating your own internal gig economy. Learning then becomes second nature as you continue to build this more effective, more agile workforce. To integrate learning into work, you have to better understand the impact of learning on work. The best way to do this is using performance measures like accuracy or speed. The people analytics function will play an important role in the future of your organization. Your workers will expect to be matched to tasks, projects, and learning that suit their interests, their strengths, and their personal goals. Outside of work, employees are already familiar with the targeted job advertisements that they find on sites like LinkedIn, so this data-driven functionality is nothing new. It's just uncharted territory for many organizations. Your head of learning has to have a seat at the table when business leaders are defining organizational strategy. They play a fundamental role in building the resources and skill sets your organization needs in the future of work. This new career model will prioritize learning, embedding it into the fabric of work. It will improve employee engagement, it will ensure that you hold on to top talent, and it will create a more agile, more fluid approach to the talent marketplace.
Though it's undoubtedly true that the future of work is always in the future, it's also undeniably true that the future of your work has never been closer. The rise of robots, machine intelligence, distributed ledgers, quantum physics, a world being eaten alive by software. All of these trends point to a new world which is shaping up quite differently from any world we've ever seen or worked in before. From the suit to the hoodie. The office and the suit have gone together like Laurel and Hardy since, well, Laurel and Hardy. But now suits are for suits. Creative, mold-breaking leaders don't wrap themselves in the conformity of an idea or a drape. The suit no longer fits. Take a peek inside Goldman Sachs. Sure, you can still spot some suits, but the real power is off to the side of the room, invisible behind a 27-inch Mac, clad in a hoodie. 70 hours minimum a week of diving for pearls in pearl in a grey flannel suit does not compute. From retired to retired. For the last 100 years, the arc of a working life has been pretty clear. Go to school, go to college, get on a career ladder, knuckle down to 40 years, relax for a decade or so, and then die. But now retirement, a phase of life that used to last 10 or 15 years, from 65 to 80, stretches out ahead for 30 or 40 years. If we quit work at 65, have we saved enough money to last us that long? For many people, the answer is no. Live long enough to live forever, says Ray Kurzweil. Sure, but how am I going to be able to afford it? Fortunately, the rise of the gig economy offers us a potential lifeline. We never need to fully retire, or we can unretire as circumstances dictate. Gigs can put food on the table as long as we can keep in the game. Retired, we can seize the work opportunities that are blossoming across the gig economy. Ride-sharing services such as Uber and Lyft, platforms such as Upwork for writing, accounting, design, and related services, Guru
for IT and engineering skills. Amazon's Mechanical Turk, offering knowledge workers a way to bid for expert work needed by organizations large and small. All of these offer the post-65 crowd a way to keep the money coming in rather than just going out.
However, what we need is a reskilling revolution if we want to help people get there. And this initiative, the Reskilling Revolution, will be aimed towards getting 1 billion people better education, better skills, and better jobs. The reason for creating a platform and the reason for doing this at the World Economic Forum is to provide better metrics, better coordination between various policy experiments, better coordination between various business initiatives, and ensuring that there are new accelerated delivery mechanisms that I hope will get us there far before 2030. In order to do that, we've been working with a number of different countries over the last year in particular on the Closing the Skills Gap accelerators. And I'm excited that here at this meeting, we will be making more announcements of countries that will be adopting this approach.
We need to do a better job of connecting workers with job vacancies and people based on the skills they have rather than the degrees they hold with the jobs that are available. Modernizing recruitment and hiring practices. America is trying to harness the interest of business in the shared goal of ensuring that the next generation of American student and the current generation of worker has the skills they need to succeed in the jobs of today and tomorrow. That's why we created our Pledge to America's Workers, which has become, at this point, really a full-blown movement with over 400 companies signing the pledge to reskill close to 15 million American students and workers. We're also working as a government to create a national workforce strategy for the first time ever, combining 14 federal agencies to come up with a blueprint, not just for rethinking education K through 12, but how do we prioritize 0 to 5, which has been underinvested in, and then also post-22, which very little federal and state funding goes towards, except if it's, really advanced degrees. So how do we start to think about education and learning as a lifelong pursuit, not compartmentalized to a very short period of time in the arc of one's life? So the National Workforce Strategy aims to answer some of those questions.
When it comes to mandatory work meetings, it's no secret that many employees dread them and even find the gatherings unproductive. But Microsoft claims it has the solution with new software that would monitor body language and facial expressions to make sure you're really paying attention. RT's Natasha Sweet has the details.
Microsoft is testing their patent on their own employees before launching the system for other companies. The tech giant is utilizing body language, facial expressions, and other information like emails and participation in meetings to scale productivity. Sensors inside boardrooms and work areas collect this data.
And we want everyone to be able to really harness these tools to help them digitally transform their organizations.
According to Microsoft, many organizations are plagued by overly long, poorly attended, and reoccurring meetings that could be modified and or avoided if more information regarding meeting quality was available. But to monitor quality, the company is using quantity. How much an employee participates in meetings, how many emails or chats are sent with certain keywords. Microsoft released its new productivity score feature in late October.
When I click into it, I see a dashboard with a set of categories. And in the upper right, you see your score on a percentage scale. And as you'll see in the score breakdown, it comprises both the people experiences and technology experiences.
Not everyone is buying into the concept, though. The tool is making headlines as it's been revealed managers are able to access individual user data. Wolfie Crystal of the independent Cracked Labs Digital Research Institute in Vienna, Austria tweets, the productivity score turns Microsoft 365 into a full-fledged workplace surveillance tool.
ActiveTrack helps organizations track, analyze, and manage their team's behavioral data, optimize individual and company-wide workflows, analyze behavioral metrics to understand employee activity, track every activity with a comprehensive activity log, use risk scoring to understand your riskiest users and their activity, capture screenshots as evidence of unwanted behavior, Create a free account now.
This is Nuri-based performance expectation versus what we have now. Research shows that employee productivity is at most 53%, causing billions of dollars labor waste for companies. Time management problems, valuable hours lost in social media, motivation lost due to improper performance judgments are the #1 reasons of decreasing productivity. Birkin measures employee productivity, supports you in decision-making processes about your company and employees. Birkin gathers information about how your employees make use of their working times, analyzes daily, weekly, monthly, and annual productivity in detail. Birkin evaluates their performance with BQ points calculated from employee activities. You may customize Birkin with many more features as needed by your company. Find focus in the modern workplace with Birkin. Birkin.com.
China has big plans to become a global leader in artificial intelligence. It has enabled a cashless economy where people make purchases with their faces. Meanwhile, some schools offer glimpses of what the future of high-tech education in the country might look like.
Good job!
Classrooms have robots that analyze students' health and engagement levels. Students wear uniforms with chips that track their locations. There are even surveillance cameras that monitor how often students check their phones or yawn during classes. These gadgets have alarmed Chinese netizens. But schools say it wasn't hard for them getting parental consent to enroll kids into what is one of the world's largest experiments in AI education. A program that's supposed to boost students' grades while also feeding powerful algorithms.
为了就是国家的这个研究呀、发展呀，我觉得是没有问题的。
The government has poured billions of dollars into the project, bringing together tech giants, startups, and schools. For this 5th grade class, the day begins with putting on a brain-wave sensing gadget. Students then practice meditating.
现在想象我们眉心有一点柔和的光芒绽放。
The device is made in China and has 3 electrodes, 2 behind the ears and 1 on the forehead. These sensors pick up electrical signals sent by neurons in the brain. The neural data is then sent in real time to the teacher's computer. So while students are solving math problems, a teacher can quickly find out who's paying attention and who's not.
说明这段时间他是有点在那走神的。
A report is then generated that shows how well the class was paying attention. It even details each student's concentration level at 10-minute intervals. It's then sent to a chat group for parents.
就是他可以看到每个人的评分。
The reports are detailed, but whether these devices really work and what they exactly measure isn't as clear. Despite the chances for false readings, teachers told us the headbands have forced students to become more disciplined.
上课回答我的问题，就是他们的声音会比平常更响亮。
Teachers say the students now pay better attention during class, and that has made them study harder and achieve higher scores.
上课认真听讲，作业做的基本上是全对的。
But not all students are as enthusiastic.
就是自己的脑筋空，我感觉这里有个紧的。
This 5th grader, whom we caught dozing off in class, told us his parents punish him for low attention scores. And that kind of data adds a new kind of pressure for students.
你想啊，如果在一次考试全班人都考了95分以上，就你考了一个85，你会不会感觉你有一种
Οι ιδέες αυτές στοχεύουν σε μια εργατική τάξη προσαρμοσμένη στα όνειρα των αφεντικών. Μια εργατική τάξη που θα εξειδικεύεται διαρκώς και θα δουλεύει μέχρι να πεθάνει. Που θα βρίσκεται σε συνεχή ανταγωνισμό μεταξύ της, που το ωράριό της θα βρίσκεται στο έλεος του κάθε αφεντικού και που θα έχει εκπαιδευτεί από την παιδική της ηλικία στον έλεγχο και την πειθαρχία. Όμως το μέλλον που σχεδιάζουν τα αφεντικά για εμάς δεν μπορεί να γίνει πραγματικότητα έτσι απλά. Απαιτεί την απόσπαση της αναγκαίας συνένεσης από μεριάς μας. Και επειδή δεν είναι καθόλου σίγουρο ότι η εργατική τάξη θα αποδεχτεί ανέμακτα κάτι τέτοιο, τα κράτη λαμβάνουν εγκαίρως τα μέτρα τους. Κοινώς, περισσότερη επιτήρηση και καταστολή όποτε χρειάζεται. Η υποδομή και οι τεχνολογίες που κατασκευάζονται δεν αφορούν σε εφαρμογές που μπορούν να χρησιμοποιηθούν είτε για καλό είτε για κακό, όπως κάποιοι διατείνονται. Αντίθετα, είναι σχεδιασμένες με τέτοιο τρόπο που οδηγούν με μαθηματική ακρίβεια σε ένα πρωτόγνωρα ολοκληρωτικό μοντέλο διακυβέρνησης, το οποίο θα φέρει το μανδύα της επιστήμης και της κοινωνικής προόδου. Και αν κάποτε το να υπάρχει ένας μπάτσος να παρακολουθεί καθημερινά κάθε άτομο, να υποκλέπτει όλες τις κλήσεις και την αλληλογραφία του ήταν απλά αδύνατο, σήμερα τείνει να γίνει περιττό. Καθώς κράτη και εταιρείες θα μπορούν με πολύ μικρό κόστος να ξέρουν τα πάντα για εμάς, από το τι κάνουμε, πώς νιώθουμε και πώς αντιδρούμε στο κάθε τι, η έννοια της παρακολούθησης αποκτά νέες διαστάσεις. Το μέλλον που χτίζεται δεν περιλαμβάνει μόνο την καταστολή των ατόμων και των ομάδων που θα αντιστέκονται σε αυτή τη δυστοπία, αφορά σε κράτη που θα διαχειρίζονται τους φόβους, τις ανάγκες και τις επιθυμίες μας για να καθορίσουν τις συμπεριφορές μας που θα μπορούν να παρεμβαίνουν σε πραγματικό χρόνο πριν οι σκέψεις μας γίνουν καν πράξεις που η κάθε μία και ο καθένας μας θα αυτολογοκρίνεται και θα αυτοπειθαρχεί υπό το φόβο της μόνιμης παρακολούθησης.
The biggest U.S. Department of Defense construction project isn't an aircraft carrier or a nuclear missile site. It's a massive data storage facility in Utah. What will be stored there is raising serious questions. CCTV's Jim Spellman has that story.
In a field in Utah, about a half hour south of Salt Lake City, a massive construction project is wrapping up. When it is completed in a few months, it will be the world's largest repository of digital information. Its owners, the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA. James Bamford has been writing about the NSA for more than 30 years.
All the information will be stored there, and then people at NSA headquarters or at their different listening posts around the world will be able to dip into it.
It's called the Utah Data Center, sprawling more than 450,000 square meters with its own power plant, water pumping station to cool the servers, and intense security. It's a key part of the NSA strategy. Gather as much information as possible from as many sources as possible and use it to stop terrorist attacks and create strategic advantages over rival countries.
What this is really about is the ability to take a lot of data and learn things that you otherwise can't. And to do that, you need to throw mountains of information at very powerful computers.
Where the data is coming from is what concerns privacy advocates. So if I make a phone call, send a text message, do a Google search on my phone, that's information that could end up at this data center in Utah?
Oh, definitely, any kind of communication.
But there's no sign the NSA or intelligence agencies in other countries are slowing down this hunt for data and information.
Is this an arms race for data?
Yeah, it's very much an arms race for data.
And this data center in Utah is soon to be the United States' biggest weapon in its information arsenal. But the NSA is one of the most secretive agencies in the US government, with little oversight from Congress. Even its budget is not publicly released. So what data is stored here and where it came from will likely never be fully known.
After 9/11, they took one of the programs I had done, or the back end part of it, and started to use it to spy on everybody in this country. Every domain, think of a domain as an activity, a specific type of activity, phone calls, or banking is another domain. So if you think of graphing each domain, and then each graph then turning it in the third dimension, the trick now is to map through all the domains in that third dimension, pulling together all the attributes that any individual has in every domain, so that now I can pull your entire life together.
In 1994, two PhD students, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, began working on their automated web crawling and page ranking application as part of their research project. They had bet on making the exploding internet easy to access, and it paid off enormously. Sergey Brin's part of the Stanford research was funded by the NSA and CIA. Brin would often report progress to non-Stanford individuals, one of whom was Dr. Rick Steinheiser. Steinheiser represented the CIA's Office for Research and Development to oversee their research funding in a joint CIA-NSA program. It wasn't uncommon at the time for research projects to be funded by the intelligence community. Government intelligence agencies had set up programs and often seed-funded projects. Roughly $3 to $4 million of funding flowed through the intelligence community programs into universities. And while both Google and the intelligence community deny that the CIA directly funded the start of Google, it's evident that the intelligence community's research funding helped not only Google, but Silicon Valley as a whole. There are many ways this relationship is built and preserved. One of the biggest is perhaps the Highlands Forum. There's a good chance that you've never heard of this forum, but it connects the wider Department of Defense and the intelligence community to the tech startups. This keeps the military and the intelligence community at the cutting edge of tech. Many executives on the Highland Forum hold positions in the CIA, NSA, and many other agencies. Movements from these agencies into Silicon Valley is common. For example, in 2012, the Highlands co-chair, who also worked at DARPA, left the agency to accept a senior executive position at Google. In an email thread made public, Sergey Brin discussed information sharing for the purposes of national security with the head of the NSA. In 1999, at the peak of the dot-com boom, the CIA launched In-Q-Tel, a Silicon Valley venture capital fund. Its mission was to invest in startups that aligned with intelligence agencies' needs. In 2003, the CIA, through In-Q-Tel, would invest in Keyhole. Keyhole was a startup that built 3D global mapping software. One of its first uses was to support US troops during Operation Iraqi Freedom, the campaign to overthrow Saddam Hussein. The next year, Google bought Keyhole, whose team now included CIA personnel. Google would soon turn Keyhole into the basis for Google Earth. Only a year after the purchase, the director responsible for initially investing in Keyhole at the CIA investing firm In-Q-Tel moved to take a position at Google. During this period, Google would win contracts for different search applications for the NSA and CIA. It's understandable that Google has a relationship with the CIA and many other government agencies. In fact, most tech giants do. The greatest demonstration of the company's integration into the intelligence community is Google Federal. Google Federal was launched in 2006, and its purpose is to serve federal contracts. At a certain point, this branch of Google had so many former NSA staff that they became known as the NSA West. At its very launch, Google Federal went on a hiring spree, hiring managers and salespeople from the Army, Air Force, CIA, Raytheon, and Lockheed Martin. It added to its lobbying prowess by assembling a team of Democratic and Republican operatives. According to Fred Burton, a former intelligence agent at the security branch of the State Department, quote, "Google is getting White House and State Department support and air cover. In reality, they are doing things the CIA cannot do." More recently, Google created a tool to track if users are at high risk of radicalization based upon their internet usage. The tool redirects them to government websites focused on persuading them off their ideas. It seems now, more than ever, Google and other tech giants are blurring the line between corporate and government intelligence.
Well, to understand what the internet is and what the internet has become, you have to go back to the very beginning. Back to the 1960s, when the internet was being created by the Pentagon. Back then, America was a relatively new global empire, facing an increasingly chaotic and violent world. There was the Vietnam War, that was central, but the US was facing insurgencies all around the world, from Latin America to Southeast Asia. It was also facing an increasingly volatile and violent domestic environment. You had the anti-war movement, you had militant black activism, you had groups like the Weather Underground that were setting out bombs seemingly daily in cities all across the country. you had race riots in major cities. And America's paranoid generals looked at this, right? And they saw a vast communist conspiracy, of course. They saw the Soviet Union expanding globally, underwriting insurgencies all around the world, backing countries that were opposed to America. At the same time, they were underwriting opposition movements in America. And they saw this as a new kind of war that was happening. This was not a war, this is not a traditional war that you could fight with traditional weapons. This is not a war that you could drop a nuke on. It was not a war that you could send a tank division into, because the combatants did not wear uniforms and they did not march in formation. They were part of the civilian population of the conflicts that they were taking part in. So it was a new kind of war, a new kind of an insurgency, a global insurgency. And in certain rarefied circles in the military, people who were familiar with the new kind of computer technology being developed, they believed that the only way to fight and win this new war was to develop new information weapons. Computer technology that could ingest data on people and political movements, that could combine opinion surveys, economic data, criminal histories, draft histories, photographs, telephone conversations intercepted by the security services, and put that all into databases that could allow analysts to perform sophisticated analysis on it and run predictive surveys. The idea was you have to find out who the enemy is and isolate it from the general population, and then take that enemy out. And at the time, some even dreamed of one day creating a global system of management that could watch the world in real time and intercept threats before they happened, in much the same way that America's early warning radar defense system did for hostile aircraft. This is the general background from which the internet emerged. Today, its counterinsurgency origins, the counterinsurgency origins of the internet, have been obscured. They've been lost, for the most part. Very few histories even mention it even in a little bit. But at the time that it was being created in the 1960s, the origins of the internet and the origins of this technology, as a tool of surveillance and as a tool of control, was very obvious to people back then. At the time, people did not see computers and computer networks as tools of liberation or utopian technologies. They saw them as tools of political and social control. And that specifically included the ARPANET, the network that would later grow into the internet.
The internet was never intended as a tool of liberation. It was, from its very inception, intended to be a tool for tracking, surveilling, and ultimately controlling a target population. And in the volatile environment of the 1960s, that target population quickly morphed from the Viet Cong counterinsurgents into the American public itself, and anyone else who could pose a threat to the Pentagon's ambitions at home or abroad. As the next generation of networking technologies threatens to add not just our Facebook data and our Google searches and our tweets and our purchases to the government's databases, but actually to connect every object in the world directly to those databases, the military is once again at the cutting edge of the next internet revolution.
Internet of Things is penetrating an ever widening swath of daily life and the global economy. Our good friends and helpful proliferators of information at Wikipedia define the Internet of Things as the network of physical objects, things embedded with electronics, software, sensors, network connectivity, which enables these objects to collect and exchange data. Essentially, it allows objects to be sensed and controlled remotely, creating an integration between physical world and computer systems. The military has been a leader in developing many of the Internet of Things component technologies, but can do more to leverage the benefits of Internet of Things solutions.
From the earliest days of network computing, when the ARPANET was still just a twinkle in its engineers' eyes and famed ARPA computer scientist J.C.R. Licklider was writing memos to his colleagues in Palo Alto updating them on his vision for an intergalactic computer network, to today, when DARPA scientists are plotting military uses for the Internet of Things. The technology underpinning the US government's plan for full-spectrum dominance of the cyber world has advanced by leaps and bounds. But the vision itself remains the same. In this vision, every person is tracked, their conversations recorded, their purchases monitored, their social networks mapped, their habits studied, and, ultimately, their behaviors predicted, so that the Pentagon and the spies of Silicon Valley can better control the human population. And, with the advent of technologies that ensure that every item we own will be spying on us and broadcasting that data through networks that are compromised by the intelligence agencies, that vision is closer than ever to a reality. And there, helping that vision to come to reality, are the giants of big tech, who were founded, funded, aided, and, when needed, compromised by the spooks, spies, and soldiers who desire complete control over the cyber world. This is the secret of Silicon Valley. In a key sense, the big tech giants are the Pentagon and the intelligence community. The DoD and the intelligence agencies are the big tech giants. It was this way from the very dawn of modern computing, and it remains this way today. We should not be surprised that the world of the Internet, the world bequeathed to us by the ARPANET, is increasingly looking like an always-on surveillance device. That was what it was intended to be.
What if every action that you took in your life was recorded in a score like it was a video game? Bad actions lowered your score, while good actions raised your score. Your score could easily be looked up by anybody online, and depending on how high or low it was, people may think higher or lesser of you. Your score's value reflects how everybody else in the real-world game of life perceives you as either a good or a bad person, while you, in turn, can easily look up anybody else's score to gauge their own trustworthiness right when you meet them. It might seem like a weird episode of Black Mirror, but at some point later this year, in 2020, the largest country in the world is set to roll out a nationwide system very similar to this concept that will affect the daily lives of over 17% of the human population, and it's called the social credit system. Once rolled out later this year, it's expected that every one of the 1.4 billion citizens of China will be assigned a social credit score that will increase or decrease depending on actions taken that are considered by the state to be either socially beneficial or socially harmful. It will draw upon an unprecedented amount of data, using an individual's government, financial, and criminal records, as well as their online search histories, shopping habits, and social media posts. The purpose of the system is to attempt to better monitor, rate, and regulate the financial, social, and moral behavior of China's citizens in perhaps the most ambitious social experiment undertaken in the 21st century. Citizens with higher scores can expect a multitude of social benefits, while citizens with lower scores can expect a multitude of social punishments. By using a system of rewards and punishments like this, the Chinese government hopes to influence what it considers better social behavior from among its citizens. But the idea for the social credit system didn't just come out of nowhere. China essentially began beta testing the system back in 2009, when it began authorizing regional cities across the country to launch their own pilot systems. Over 42 of these systems are currently in operation across China, but each one is different and unique from every other system, and most don't even use an individual scoring number. So something you might do that would negatively affect your standing under the Beijing system might have no effect under the different system in Shanghai, or vice versa. The different regional systems in operation today have different criteria for what are considered positive or negative actions, and different rewards and punishments, so it's really difficult to generalize the system as it stands today, and it's difficult to predict what the final nationwide system will look like that Beijing finally decides upon. Overall, the central government of China has been analyzing these regional pilots for years now to see what works and what doesn't work for when they launch the nationwide system later, which is tentatively scheduled to be later in 2020. The nationwide system might include everything everything from all the regional pilots, it might pick and choose certain parts from different systems, or it might include almost nothing at all from any of them. We just won't know until China reveals more details later. However, there is plenty of room for some extreme speculation. So, here is a potential preview of everything that might be included from examples across all of China's current regional pilots. So, based on the various systems already in place, activities that could supposedly increase your social credit score once the nationwide system is in place would be things like donating blood, paying your bills on time, donating to charity, signing up for volunteer work or community service, taking care of elderly family members, or being a model employee at work, along with more, weird activities, like publicly praising the Chinese government on social media, or assisting the government authorities with cracking down on political dissenters or religious dissidents. But what I find a lot more interesting than the activities that can raise your score, though, are the various fun activities that can lower it. Under the current regional pilot in the city of Suzhou, getting caught cheating in online video games will negatively affect your social credit score. It's also been speculated that playing what the government considers to be an excessive amount of video games will also hurt your score. So here's a big F to all the gamers in China if that ends up finding its way into the final system. Other things that can negatively affect your score that might find their way into the final system include things like participating in anything on this list of groups that China considers a cult, an insincere apology in court for a crime committed, spreading false rumors or fake news on the internet, posting anti-government messages on social media, not visiting your aging parents frequently enough, participating in protests against the Chinese authorities, paying your bills late, blasting loud music on public transportation, which, to be fair, is actually kind of reasonable, but also things like ordering takeout without picking it up, or scheduling something like a doctor's appointment or a hotel reservation and not showing up, along with other things like not sorting your waste properly or committing traffic violations like jaywalking or running a red light. Currently, under the systems in Shanghai and Jinan, a citizen's score can be lowered for walking their dog in public without a leash or for not picking up their poop. If enough of these dog-related transgressions take place, the city can legally take your dog away from you and you can get slapped with up to a 5-year ban on owning any other dogs. And this leads us into the bizarre world of potential rewards and punishments. A higher score can potentially lead to some pretty great benefits like priority admissions for universities, priority resume viewings by employers, cheaper public transportation, free gym access, shorter wait times in hospitals and government agencies, discounts at hotels, and potentially generous tax breaks, among other things. Punishments, on the other hand, for lower scores can include some pretty ridiculous things, like being placed on a flight and high-speed train ban, and potentially a ban on public transportation in general, which, along with a ban on getting an exit visa, effectively traps the recipient into being a modern-day serf unable to leave their land. Other punishments include an ineligibility to hold government jobs, losing access to private schools or universities, losing access for children attending private schools or universities, being restricted to only a low-speed internet connection, a ban on renting hotels, and the weirdest of all, potentially becoming the subject of extensive public shaming campaigns. Lower score citizens may have their photos and ID numbers placed on big LED screens at busy public intersections or displayed on movie screens at theaters before the movie plays, like a weird kind of ad where you're supposed to laugh at real people. But Chinese social media companies are also helping the government out with this. In the city of Nanning, the social media app Douyin, basically the Chinese version of TikTok, partnered up with the local courts to broadcast pictures of people with low social credit scores in between videos, while China's biggest dating app, called Baihe, has already begun allowing users to publish their social credit scores inside of the app, which leads to the implication that higher scored people will do better in online dating versus people with lower scores. China is already preparing a massive investment into nationwide surveillance to help assist the system once it's finally rolled out. In 2019, it was estimated that there were already over 200 million CCTV cameras in operation by the Chinese government across the country for surveillance purposes. But by the end of 2020, that number is expected to skyrocket to well over 620 million cameras nationwide, almost enough for one camera for every 2 people in the country, many of which will be equipped with new facial recognition technology that will potentially be able to catch somebody doing something in public, like jaywalking and lowering their social credit score. And as of June 2019, China has already denied 26.8 million airline tickets and 6 million high-speed rail tickets to individuals in the country who have too low of a standing under the current regional systems. And it's not just individuals that China is potentially planning on assigning scores to, but entire corporations might get their own individual scores as well. Corporations in good standing under the system will receive things like tax breaks, while corporations in poor standing will get harsher, increased tax rates.
Το υπάρχον καπιταλιστικό μοντέλο έχει σταματήσει να είναι αποτελεσματικό για τα αφεντικά και ειδικότερα στη Δύση. Οι καπιταλιστικές οικονομίες είναι σε αδιέξοδο. Ο ρυθμός αύξησης της παραγωγικότητας της εργασίας είναι στο πιο χαμηλό επίπεδο των τελευταίων δεκαετιών. Οι διακρατικοί ανταγωνισμοί έχουν οξυνθεί και ο παγκόσμιος συσχετισμός δυνάμεων αμφισβητείται πλέον ανοιχτά. Η καπιταλιστική αναδιάρθρωση που σχεδιάζεται και είναι σε εξέλιξη αναμένεται να δώσει λύσεις εκτινάσσοντας παραγωγικότητα και κέρδη και εξασφαλίζοντας την ανταγωνιστικότητα των δυτικών οικονομιών. Η αναδιάρθρωση, ωστόσο, απαιτεί την αντιμετώπιση χρόνιων προβλημάτων στην οικονομία και τη δημιουργία ενός νέου κοινωνικού συμβολέου που θα επαναορίσει την εργασία, την εκπαίδευση, τη σχέση ανάμεσα στην εργατική τάξη, τα αφεντικά και τα κράτη, που θα επαναορίσει την ίδια την καθημερινότητα. Μια καθημερινότητα που θα πρέπει να επιβληθεί με κάθε τρόπο στην εργατική τάξη. Ο θαυμαστός κόσμος της τέταρτης βιομηχανικής επανάστασης είναι σε εξέλιξη. Αλλά όπως θα δούμε στο επόμενο μέρος, αυτό δεν είναι αρκετό για τα αφεντικά. Δεν υπάρχει χρόνος για χάσιμο. Η κατάσταση των οικονομιών και ο διεθνής ανταγωνισμός απαιτούν την επίλυση των ζητημάτων που καθυστερούν ή παρεμποδίζουν τη μετάβαση στο νέο οικονομικό μοντέλο, την εξουδετερώση των όποιων κοινωνικών αντιδράσεων και την επιτάχυνση της όλης διαδικασίας.